Theodore Roethke was born on May 25, 1908 in Saginaw, Michigan. Roethke's grandfather, Wilhelm, emigrated from Prussia several decades before Theodore's birth and was attracted to the region for its growing agricultural and lumber industries. Wilhelm and his sons established an iconic greenhouse enterprise on the banks of the Tittabawassee River. Although the greenhouses themselves no longer stand, the Roethke family homes can be found on Gratiot Avenue in Saginaw. Roethke's childhood home, now referred to as the Roethke House, is maintained as a museum. During Roethke's life, memories of this home and its greenhouses would remain a source of inspiration for his creative works.
I think we all think of Roethke with nature poetry, particularly people who live in Saginaw, who knew about his greenhouse experiences, and his experiences all through his poetry were related to his work in the greenhouse as a youngster.
He moved in this house when he was about 3. So this is the house he knew, and his biographer, Alan Seeger, said most poets receive most of their images by the time they're 15. So this is the Mecca, this is the place, and his greenhouse poems center around the life of the family and the life here.
Roethke would continue to return to his childhood home to work on his writing throughout his life.
He didn't marry till he was 45, so he was here part of the summer with his mother and sister, who took off their shoes, not to bother his muse, and he would write outside or upstairs in the upstairs porch.
During his adolescence, however, Roethke's experiences were shaped by a family that emphasized the importance of labor, adherence to family hierarchy, and traditional values. Roethke's upbringing in a German-American family and his strained relationship with his American-born father had a profound influence on his poetry. My Papa's Waltz, for instance, is the product of many late-night interactions between father and son.
The whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy, but I hung on like death. Such waltzing was not easy. We romped until the pan slid from the kitchen shelf. My mother's countenance could not unfrown itself. The hand that held my wrist was battered on one knuckle. At every step you missed, my right ear scraped a buckle. You beat time on my head with a palm caked hard by dirt, then waltzed me off to bed, still clinging to your shirt.
At an early age, Roethke developed a passion for reading and writing. An elementary school essay written for the American Red Cross, of which he was a member, was so positively received that it was distributed globally by the organization and was ultimately translated into 26 languages. Roethke attended high school at the local Arthur Hill High. When he wasn't playing tennis, taking piano lessons, or canoeing, he focused on academics and his love of writing, but, due to pressures from his mother, agreed to enter the pre-law program at the University of Michigan. His undergraduate career was marked by academic success. Socially, however, Roethke was an introspective student who ultimately changed his major to English. Although later in life Roethke talked about his hijinks in a campus fraternity and his mob connections in Chicago, scholars have noted that many of these stories were exaggerated, if not entirely fabricated. Nevertheless, he was a product of the Jazz Age, with its more carefree attitude toward alcohol and personal involvements. During this period, he earned both a bachelor's degree and master's degree from the University of Michigan and entered a graduate program at Harvard University. Theodore Roethke became a critically lauded poet and extraordinarily gifted English instructor. During the 1940s and 1950s, Roethke assumed teaching positions at Lafayette College in Pennsylvania, Bennington College in Vermont, Michigan State University, Pennsylvania State College, and the University of Washington.
Oddly enough, in some poetry circles, his reputation as a teacher is in fact as great as it is as a poet. I believe, and maybe my number's wrong, but not by much, he was the teacher to 3 people who went on to be Pulitzer Prize-winning poets. Poets such as Richard Hugo, who call him the greatest poetry teacher of the 20th century. So when you talk about influence, you talk about not only the work, but those that he inspired in the classroom, and that's remarkable.
Early on, however, Theodore Roethke's career was marked by repeated bouts of mental illness. Roethke's first mental breakdown, one that would see him sent to Ann Arbor's Mercywood Sanitarium for psychiatric treatment, occurred in 1935. A heavy drinker, he struggled with depression and what is today considered bipolar disorder. These factors account in part for his frequent change of teaching position.
I define him as a person, as someone who in his youth was floundering. Although he was a fine student in Phi Beta Kappa, he attempted law school and was not successful at law school. And it took him quite a while to publish poetry and to be comfortable with himself.
Regardless, every student of creative writing who learned under Roethke would laud him as one of the greatest teachers with which they had ever worked. His influence as a teacher of creative writing was extraordinary. Many of Roethke's students, including Carolyn Kaiser, Richard Hugo, James Wright, and Jack Gilbert, among others, would go on to become accomplished poets and, in some instances, Pulitzer Prize winners. Roethke's own writing continued to develop during this time as well. From 1941 until Roethke's death in 1963, he released 7 collections of poetry, including children's verse. Roethke received numerous awards and fellowships for his poetry and counted among his acquaintances Robert Frost, T.S. Eliot, William Carlos Williams, and W.H. Auden. He stands with them as one of the major figures in poetry of the last century, yet his poetry continues to be taught today in college campuses across the nation. In 1953, Roethke published his seminal collection, The Waking, which would go on to win a Pulitzer Prize the following year. Roethke remains the only Michigan poet to be distinguished by this honor. Around that same time, in 1953, Roethke married Beatrice O'Connell, who remained a constant source of support as he crafted his poetry during the last few years of his life. Theodore Roethke suffered a heart attack in 1963 while swimming in a friend's pool. The pool, located on Bainbridge Island, Washington, would later be converted into a Zen garden that can still be visited today. In 1964, The Far Field was published posthumously and cemented Roethke's legacy, winning a National Book Award in 1965. Since his death, numerous collections of Roethke's work have continued to be published and remain in circulation.
I think it's the fact that you can go back to his work again, as I said earlier before, really any time throughout your life and find something. There's a lyricism to his work, there's a poignancy, and it is only getting stronger with age, I think. Some poets are of their era, and you can read their work, and you can say, he was a great poet of the 60s, a great poet of the 70s. Roethke's work has endured, and I think become stronger over the course of the decades.